It's a Politics Wednesday edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer on this very first day of July 2026. Joining us with their analysis this hour, Sara Mitchell, Professor of Political Science and Collegiate Fellow at the University of Iowa. Sara, welcome back to the program.
Good to be here.
Dave Peterson with us as well, Lucan Professor of Political Science at Iowa State University. Good to have you on board, Dave. Thank you.
Good to be here, Ben. Hi, Sara.
Hi.
A good portion of our program today will be, as you may have guessed, getting sort of the political ramifications, the aftermath of the last Supreme Court rulings. The Supreme Court's October 2025 term concluded yesterday, June 30th, and it was by any measure a blockbuster. So we want to talk mainly about birthright citizenship, but also about the other big ones: executive power, election law, trans athletes, campaign finance, and big picture views here as well. Before we dig into this, I want to make sure our listeners know you can ask Dave and Sara questions about what you think are the political ramifications of these decisions. 1-866-780-9100, River to River at iowapublicradio.org. This 6-3 conservative majority handed down consequential rulings across executive power, immigration, voting rights, gun rights, culture war issues. Some decisions here went dramatically against the president. Others expanded presidential authority in historic ways. The term is widely being called one of the most consequential in decades. Dave, you first. What's your overall read on this Supreme Court term? Does it rank historically, as it's been said, to be one of the most consequential in decades?
Yes, absolutely. This Supreme Court overturned long-standing important precedent, like Humphrey's executor in their decision about the FTC director, FTC person being fired. The decisions on trans athletes doesn't just impact questions about trans athletes, but they essentially ruled that trans folks don't have equal protection in this country. They functionally ended the Voting Rights Act. They limited the president in some important ways on tariffs and in the birthright citizenship, but the birthright citizenship decision was a 5-4, where 4 justices said essentially that the Constitution doesn't say what the Constitution says, and that people born in this country aren't necessarily citizens.
Mm-hmm. And Sara, your reaction to this term, the last big decisions here, first and foremost, please.
Yeah, I think it's giving new meaning to what does precedent mean in judicial decisions, because we're talking about the overturning of, in some cases, decisions that have been on the books for, 100 years or more. And so, I think in general, some of the action that they've been taking to strengthen the executive is sort of stems from going back to when Ronald Reagan was elected, and he had a theory, right, that not only should the federal government shrink and states should have more control over policy, but also that the president should have greater control over discretionary policymaking within the executive branch. And that idea came to be known as the unitary executive theory. And I think you're seeing in both Trump versus Slaughter, in that decision, it's holding that basically the president has the power to remove members of the Federal Trade Commission and effectively all regulatory commission members for any reason. And so, as I said, this was overturning a 1935 decision that held the opposite. And if you think about, presidents could essentially abuse the powers they have, not only in sort of the regular process, they can appoint commission members and control agency budgets, but they could actually use this, right, to put their friends and allies in these positions. They could not appoint people, so they could stop agencies from having quorum to operate. So there could be real sabotage that happens in these cases. And I think combined with the previous decision that the president has immunity for official acts in 2024, essentially this is a presidential act, right? And so I think it's critics of this decision are very concerned about how much authority this is going to give to the president.
Mm-hmm. Can you put that more in historical terms, Sarah? Has the executive in our country ever had more power than currently? Or, I mean, in modern times, I guess would be a better framing?
I mean, I think you saw, right, during the Watergate era, there was an attempt, right, to put some controls, also because of the Vietnam War, to put controls over presidential authority. And so I think these recent decisions are sort of pushing back in the other direction, and sort of building on that unitary executive theory that Reagan was espousing.
Mm-hmm. Join our conversation, 1-866-780-9100, river to river at iowapublicradio.org. Let's drill down on the birthright citizenship decision in a sharp rebuke to President Trump. Chief Justice Roberts wrote for the majority, joined by Sotomayor, Kagan, Barrett, and Jackson, that the 14th Amendment guarantees birthright citizenship to virtually all children born in the U.S., including children of undocumented parents. Roberts wrote that citizenship is, quote, the right to have rights, and the framers extended that promise to every freeborn person in the land. Thomas and Gorsuch dissented outright. Kavanaugh concurred in the judgment, but left a narrow door open for Congress to act on a statutory basis. That's a point that President Trump immediately seized on. Let's listen to a couple of audio clips here before. First, we'll go to Dave for his reaction. But first, Speaker Mike Johnson was in the middle of answering a reporter's question on birthright citizenship yesterday when the decision came out. Let's listen.
I think anybody who looks at this... Oh dear.
The decision is children born in the United States, parents unlawfully or temporarily present, are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and are citizens at birth under the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause. What's your reaction to that, Mr. Speaker?
Well, I need to read the opinion, okay? But obviously you could say that's a textualist, originalist view. However, I do think that this has been grossly abused in recent years.
Okay, juxtapose that with the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Representative Adanio Espaillet, a Democrat from New York. He spoke outside the Supreme Court Tuesday following the birthright ruling. Here he is.
An unequivocal statement, an American statement, that we will not be held to a different standard, that our children that are born here are U.S.-born children, irregardless of our status, and that we belong and we deserve to have all the rights and privileges extended to all Americans by the U.S. Constitution. Trump tried to erase one of our nation's clearest constitutional guarantee, and he failed.
So what do you make of this? Join our conversation, 1-866-780-9100, river to river at iowapublicradio.org. Chief Justice Roberts writing that the 14th Amendment was designed to wipe the slate clean, that in America we do not punish children for the sins of their fathers. Dave, what does this ruling tell you? And the split here, the concurrence there by Kavanaugh, perhaps leaving an open door for Congress?
Yeah, I mean, Kavanaugh clearly signals that he believes that the only reason why birthright citizenship exists in this country is by an act of Congress. So it's a legislative decision, not one bound up on the actual language of the 14th Amendment. And so that's a signal that, perhaps, that Congress should revisit that decision, and that could potentially sway his vote. That theoretically, if nobody else changes, that would still be a 5-4 decision. But it does sort of open the door. It does mean, right, that this is going to be on the public agenda for years now, right? This is a decision where one vote can swing it. right? So if one of the 5 justices leaves the bench and is replaced by someone who sides with the minority here, the fundamental right of birthright citizenship will be gone regardless of what the Constitution actually says. We hear Johnson and we hear others talk about it being abused, right? And there's this canard about birth tourism. Ultimately, that's a question about whether or not birthright citizenship is a good policy, which is fundamentally distinct from the question, which is it's constitutional. They may not like how it's used, right? We don't like how free speech is always used, but it's a constitutional right that everyone born in this country has.
Mm-hmm. Sara, the 14th Amendment, written specifically to grant citizenship to formerly enslaved Americans. How striking is it to you that Trump's executive order effectively put that post-Civil War guarantee on trial and that 3 conservative justices were willing to question it?
Yeah, and 2 of them writing over 100-page dissents.
Yeah, Thomas
articulating.
Thomas is an incredibly long dissent. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I was just talking about precedent. So in this case, Roberts was leaning on the 1898 decision from the Supreme Court, which is U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark. And that one had to do with whether the son of a Chinese national would be granted citizenship. And so, it's kind of interesting, right? That Roberts was sort of leaning heavily on precedent in that case to uphold birthright citizenship. But then at the same time, the court ruled in another decision that essentially the government doesn't have to allow people seeking temporary protected status the right to cross the border into the United States. And I think so in that regard, we'll come back and talk more about that.
We'll come back and talk. Exactly. You hear the music, Sara. I'll throw this in, too. We've got to go away for a couple minutes, and we'll be back with Sara Mitchell of the University of Iowa, Dave Peterson of Iowa State University, and you, if you'd like to join us as we mostly dissect the last of the huge SCOTUS decisions. 1-866-780-9100. It's a Politics Wednesday edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer with political scientists Dave Peterson of Iowa State University, Sara Mitchell of the University of Iowa. Mostly this hour spending time to get their views on the last of this term's Supreme Court rulings. They're big ones, monumental, would not be too big a word to put to it. We're talking about birthright citizenship. That ruling, the 14th Amendment, says the High Court guarantees birthright citizenship to virtually all children born in the U.S., including children of undocumented parents. Let me throw in, overall, a curious lack or just not an outpouring of reaction from our congressional delegation. It was hard to find a lot of the reaction and also the candidates challenging them in these midterm elections. But here's Ashley Hinson, of course, Congresswoman Hinson running for the open Senate seat. She wrote, "For too long, birthright citizenship has been exploited to incentivize illegal immigration." Sara, we had to cut you off before the break. Go on to make your point.
Yeah, so historically, if people were coming from, let's say you were fleeing a war zone, like you were leaving Syria during the Civil War, if you went to another country, you could seek political asylum. So essentially, like you're fleeing violence or being persecuted in your home country. And in the past, the United States would allow people to apply for political asylum. They would come into the United States, and then they would wait for their trial, essentially, to hear that case. But going back to the Obama administration, there was a move to try to physically stop people from entering the U.S. for those asylum requests and to get Mexico to agree to keep people in Mexico rather than having them come in the U.S. And so this one of the Supreme Court decisions essentially allows Trump to continue that. So to keep people at these ports of entry rather than letting them inside the country while they seek political asylum. And also they voted in another. They voted also to end temporary deportation protections for people from Haiti and Syria. So those two things combined essentially will make it harder for illegal aliens anyway to have children when, because it's harder to get inside the United States while seeking asylum.
Mm-hmm. Let's move to executive power. Sara, you said quite a bit of that earlier. I want to give Dave a crack at it. We had the independent agency ruling seeming to pull in two directions, expanding Trump's power over the FTC while protecting the Fed. I wonder if you think that's a legal, coherent legal framework, or is this, in your eyes, threading a needle for political reasons, Dave?
I think it's threading a needle for financial reasons. This doesn't seem like a coherent framework for me, right? So the question here is, can agencies created by Congress and signed into law by the president have this insulation from presidential firing? Like Sara talked about that quite well. And the court essentially has ruled that Congress cannot create those institutions anymore. And Congress has lost the ability to rein in the executive in this way, with the exception of the Federal Reserve. And I think the reason for the Federal Reserve is that if the Federal Reserve were to lose its independence, if the president were able to fire the members of the Federal Reserve Board, it would be such a massive shock to our economic system, right? So part of the reason why we have a decent amount of stability in our economic system is the Fed, that it works on monetary policy to make sure that the economy doesn't run too hot or too cold. And it's meant to be insulated from political pressure, right? So an incumbent president, for instance, would really like the economy to be strong, particularly as elections approach. And that timing could be short-term good for the economy, but long-term really, really bad for the economy. And so we've created this insulated institution to be able to handle our monetary policy free from political influence. And so if the court had ruled that the Fed was just like any other of these congressionally created institutions, it would have been a huge shock to the market. And it would have been probably quite bad for the market and bad for the economy. And so I think that's what has sort of led the justices to try to thread this needle.
Right, and that's not just theory there, that it would be bad for the economy. We have many examples from abroad where authoritarian leaders have control of monetary policy. And as you said, Dave, acted in their interest for short-term policy to get reelected and drove the monetary policy and the economy into the ground, right?
Yes. That's exactly right. I mean, Sarah's really probably the better expert on the sort of international politics of this. But yeah, that's exactly my thought on this, is that we do know from countries that don't have these independent central banks that their economies tend to seriously underperform.
Yeah. And Sara, before we move on, any last words on that one, the executive power?
Well, yeah, I mean, case in point, Turkey, right? So under Erdogan, Turkey basically reduced the independence of their Federal Reserve Bank, and you saw significantly increasing inflation within Turkey as a result. And we already have inflation in the United States, right, that we're dealing with. So I mean, people are sort of joking that the judges are protecting their retirement accounts here, but I mean, and they are, but yeah, I mean, to threaten the independence of the Fed would be significant. But let's not dismiss what's happening on the other side, because,
Right.
these other agencies include things like the Security and Exchange Commission and, the FTC. And, these are bodies that should have independence to some extent, right? And once if you just politicize everything, and you just fire people at will within the government, right? Then the entire efficacy of these, the ability of these institutions to perform their jobs becomes seriously undermined. And so I think, yeah, the Supreme Court is being very inconsistent between these two decisions.
Mm-hmm. Join our conversation, 1-866-780-9100, river to river at iowapublicradio.org. Sara Mitchell of the University of Iowa, Dave Peterson of Iowa State University. Here's something I think in your wheelhouse, more in your wheelhouse, Dave, the mail-in ballot ruling. 5-4 decision here. 2 conservative justices joining the liberals here, and also Iowa, we have to say, has had its own fights over mail-in and absentee voting rules. What does it say about the court, first of all, about public trust in elections when the same 6-3 court that just weakened the Voting Rights Act also protects mail-in voting? Unravel that a bit for us, Dave.
Yeah, sure. So the mail-in voting decision is essentially that states can have rules and can have control over what the rules are for counting of ballots, right? So Mississippi, in this case, had a rule that says as long as ballots are postmarked by Election Day, they can be counted even if they show up after Election Day. And the consistency here is in part that the states get to control these things, right? So the gutting of the Voting Rights Act is getting the DOJ, the Federal Department of Justice, and the federal courts out of the regulating of state-level election maps. Right. Now, it's a different mix of justices in some of these, right? But that's essentially the consistency here. The Constitution is pretty clear that states get to be the ones to administer and control how elections operate. And so this is a decision that says states can follow the rules that they set. And lots of states have this, right? The rule that about, if you're going to have a mail-in ballot, when does it have to be postmarked by versus when does it have to be received? I mean, the dissent talked about, sort of nonsensically, frankly, about how this means there's not an election day or that the will of the voters is not codified on Election Day, but as long as the ballots are postmarked by Election Day, the act of voting was done by that day, which is the constitutionally mandated part of it. And so just because it arrives late, it doesn't mean that the Election Day, capital E, capital D, didn't exist or was violated because everyone had to vote by that day. And we've had a history of questions with this, right? One of the legacies of the 2000 election was, what do we do with military votes, right? Who are soldiers who are serving abroad? When do their ballots have to get in? Because if you're serving in one of the more remote parts, or if if the military mail takes a long time, do soldiers' votes get to count? And if not, why not? And so this has been a conversation or an argument that's been going on for quite some time now.
Right. And connect that to what happened this week in the U.S. House. It's ground to a sudden halt. Speaker Mike Johnson sent lawmakers home early for the 4th of July recess after a rebellion by conservative hardliners paralyzed the floor for a second consecutive week. These are holdouts. They are demanding that a controversial proof of citizenship voting bill, the Save America Act, be attached. Right, Dave? So there is the connection. Because the president is not happy about this high court ruling.
Right. The SAVE Act is trying to we've talked about this a handful of times on your show here, right? It's trying to create federal rules about voter identification and other things. And Trump desperately wants this thing to pass, and it's not going to. And so, he has said he won't sign the housing bill as a result. The Congress has screeched to a halt over this. Now, I know everyone's going to think, Congress screeching to a halt, that happens all the time, but it actually is creating quite a bit of chaos inside of Congress. And it doesn't really have a path forward because it's going to get blocked in the Senate anyway. They've been tying Trump has been trying to tie everything to this act, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere.
Yeah. Sara, weigh in on that if you'd like. Where is this going? This stalemate, screeching to a halt, whatever you want to call it.
Well, yeah, I think you have people that are able to block these votes on both sides. So in the conservative end of the spectrum, you have some members of the House that are like holding up things like the defense budget bill because they want this Save America Act voted on or included. And then you have people on the more moderate side, especially in the Senate, that are like pushing back, right, saying that they're not going to like put these bills together essentially. And so, I mean, Johnson did sign, he sent the Housing Act to the president on Monday, I think. So essentially, if Trump doesn't sign or veto it in 10 days, then that would become law. So it'll be interesting to see. I think maybe Trump will just do nothing on this one. But yeah, I mean, this, if you look at output of Congress, this is one of, we keep seeing fewer and fewer bills being passed through Congress as we look in the last few decades. And I think we're starting to get a sense of why this is, why this bipartisan or, partisan back and forth is holding up our sort of regular business of the United States of America.
Yeah, whereby the Republicans have control of both chambers, but just by a hair in the House for sure. Let's scoot through a couple of other big Supreme Court rulings before we come to a break. The court ruled unanimously that Idaho and West Virginia's trans athlete bans don't violate Title IX, but split on the constitutional equal protection question. We had someone named Becky Pepper Jackson finishing last in cross country. She was told she wasn't good enough to make the team, still barred by law. Sara, back to you. What does this mean constitutionally that the law targets someone like her? And we have to mention that Iowa is one of 26 states that already have similar bans. So I guess that has a great impact for transgender students in Iowa schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, on the one hand, if you look at public opinion on these issues, the court is essentially siding with public opinion. So Charles Franklin's Marquette University survey shows that 63% of Americans favor prohibiting transgender girls and women from participating in girls' sports. But on the other hand, right, 68% of adults support birthright citizenship, and they actually disagree with the court on allowing candidates to provide unlimited financial contributions by parties. So in that case, 74% say there should be some kind of limitations on campaign finance. So I think it's, the court historically, if you look at their public opinion, they're at a low basically since going back to 2000 or earlier. So the public already is not pleased with the Supreme Court, but I think at least in this particular case, their ruling was siding with public opinion.
Let's talk about campaign finance briefly. In the third Kavanaugh-authored majority of the day, the court struck down Watergate-era limits on coordinated spending between national party committees and their candidates. The National Republican Committee issued a memo within hours of that ruling announcing it was sunsetting its independent expenditure unit, would now allow coordinating directly with Senate campaigns on everything, ads, targeting messaging. Dave, we've got less than 2 minutes here. Mm-hmm. What has just changed about American campaigns due to this rule?
I mean, sure. I mean, right. So the two big pieces to it are, one, this makes it much, much easier for people to give incredible amounts of money to candidates through political parties, right? So in the past, parties and candidates wouldn't be able to coordinate and wouldn't be able to work together directly. There were ways around that, and that was skirted some. The other piece to it that I think has gotten a little bit less attention is that this means that political parties and super PACs and others can now buy ads at lower rates. So TV networks are not allowed. TV networks have to sell ads to candidates at the lowest possible rate. They don't have to sell ads to parties or super PACs at the lowest possible rate. So up until yesterday, a candidate having $1 could go a lot further than a party or a super PAC having $1 for advertising, right? Because they could buy cheaper ads. This means that they're going to be able to swamp the system even more because the TV networks and others will have to charge those lower rates to super PACs and parties, which is going to really sort of upset the balance of the ways in which money works. Yeah, I mean, this is really unpopular. People hate this. People think money in campaigns is terrible, and this is just going to make the problem worse.
Join our conversation. We're going to take another break. Dave Peterson of Iowa State University, Sara Mitchell of the University of Iowa, 1-866-780-9100, river to river at iowapublicradio.org. After the break, I promise I'll get to the callers waiting to weigh in on this edition of Politics Wednesday. I'm Ben Kiefer. Back in just a moment. Politics Wednesday on this edition of River to River from IPR News. Sara Mitchell of the University of Iowa, Dave Peterson of Iowa State University. Join us, 1-866-780-9100, river to river at iowapublicradio.org. The Supreme Court term in review. It ended yesterday. The conservative 6-3 majority handing down consequential rulings across executive power, immigration, voting rights, gun rights, culture war issues. Some decisions went dramatically against the president, President Trump. Others expanded presidential authority in historic ways, a term that's being called one of the most consequential in decades. Let's go to our phones, 1-866-780-9100. Suzanne is joining us from Grinnell. Thanks for waiting. What's on your mind here, Suzanne?
Hi, yes. Yeah, when people quote that something is in congruence with public opinion, it's important to point out that there has been huge amounts of money and effort by right-wing organizations to try to shape the transgender opinion, and it has shifted just dramatically in reaction to that. So it's not fair to say, well, the Supreme Court just is in line with public opinion, as if that is just the static drops from heaven. No, we're being actively assaulted to have this opinion.
Well, freedom of speech, I guess, comes into that discussion too, Suzanne. What's your reaction to Suzanne's, Sara, do you have an idea there about her thought?
Yeah, I agree with what she's saying, that public opinion is certainly swayed by leaders, by groups, by media, like all sorts of people.
Right. But I mean,
sources.
that's the way we work, right? We have freedom of speech. You can have ads. You can have messages on social media. In theory, anyway. I'm just trying to bolster that side of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't trying to say that I support the judgment. I was just saying I was trying to make the broader point about which of the decisions the court is in line with current public opinion polls and which judgments it's not in line with.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Let's go to Gary. Gary is joining us from Cumming, I believe. Gary, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I just want to ask your guest, and I appreciate everything you're saying here. The cruelty and the corruption of this administration is like nothing I've ever seen in my life, and I think others would, a lot of other people would agree with that. But from an ethical standpoint, what happens to guys like Grassley and Ernst? I mean, it's right in front of them. You know, Donald Trump has pocketed over $2 billion since in 1 year of office. And look what he's doing with his family and his friends like Stephen Miller and the rest of the regime. You know, what happened to the ethics? How did that manage to erode? I don't know if that's a fair question, but
okay.
I ask
Gary,
myself, can't they see this?
Okay. Gary wants an answer. I don't know if you can deliver it. Thanks, Gary, for calling from Cumming. Dave, do you want to tackle Gary's, I guess, frustration?
Yeah, no, I understand exactly where Gary's coming from. I think a lot of it is, the people like Senator Grassley and Senator Ernst, any politician, are strategic actors, right? They are constantly thinking about how to balance. Let me phrase it broadly, and what they think is the right thing to do versus what they need to do for their career. And they do, and politicians do that all the time, right? Any vote that they're taking, they strike a balance between what they think is right and what their constituents want, or what other actors in the political party want. And in this case, it's become clear that Donald Trump wields such an influence over the Republican Party that that balance is, I think, to sort of echo Gary's point, out of whack, right? That crossing Trump on these things is dooms Republican politicians in lots of ways. The only times we tend to see politicians actually start to push back, Republican politicians actually start to push back on President Trump, is after they've either lost a primary or announced their retirement. And when they no longer have that electoral threat over them, then they start to push back. Because in part they're trying to keep their jobs. I mean, I think on one level it's easy to understand. Lots of us have to do things in our jobs that we don't necessarily like. And politicians aren't necessarily different than that. It's just they're doing it very, very publicly. And so we tend to not quite think of them as normal people with normal jobs.
Yeah. Sarah, do you agree with that explanation?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been stories, right, in the media where people will not go on the record, but Republicans will say they have a fear of speaking out, fear for themselves, fear for their families. For people that have spoken out, not only have they been primaried in many cases, they've been doxxed, where people go after them, try to like send police to their house or things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think we've actually seen many cases where Trump has retaliated against people, and there's been significant costs. Even when you remember Senator Grassley was saying on the mic in the committee hearing, what's the big deal if he admits that Biden won the election? Grassley actually took criticism for saying that, right? And that was just kind of an innocent, off the cuff remark. And so yeah, absolutely. I think these people want to keep their jobs. They want to protect their families. That's why they're acting this way. On the bigger point of corruption, you're absolutely right. We can look at many places in around the world that have had very corrupt regimes, and how as citizens can we fight this? Obviously, voting is one way to do that, but also, making your voice heard with your representatives about the things that you're not happy about. So contact them, get out there and protest when you can. So make your voice heard in as many ways as you can.
Floyd is on the line from Ottumwa. Floyd wants to go back to our 14th Amendment ruling guaranteeing birthright citizenship to virtually all children born in the U.S., including children of undocumented parents. Isaac is with us, and I understand, looking at my screen, Isaac, you're an immigration lawyer and want to comment on this. Welcome to our program.
Yes, thank you, Ben. Thank you, all your listeners. Yeah, I'm an immigration attorney here in Iowa City, but also I am a 14th Amendment American citizen because my parents were not U.S. citizens when I was born in this country. And I think it's a great decision. Shocked me that it was 5-4. And for the public listening, and it was noted in the show, is that not only is this administration going for unauthorized immigrants and limiting and restricting them, but it's also attacking the established protocols. We talk about seeking asylum at the border. And the Biden administration also had this policy, but they're also increasingly going after the legal pathways that have been established. So they're really using all the tools possible to meet their desired outcome, and the public needs to be aware. And I get a lot of individuals that tell me, how can I help? Be engaged, vote, but also neighborhood by neighborhood. Get to know your neighbors, be kind, and this country eventually will come around.
Isaac in Iowa City, thank you very much for your input this hour.
Thank you.
And we have another caller on the line. I think he wants to. Floyd is with us from.
This is Floyd
is this
from Tumwa.
Yeah, Floyd, you've been waiting. Thanks.
Ben,
Sorry.
I did have a remark about that 14th Amendment, but I want to talk about this 2027 fiscal year National Defense Authorization Act. They've got something in there called the Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. Now, Pete and Sarah would know about this. This thing calls for something called cooperation without oversight. My friend, this is just beyond belief. We can't have that. Now, that would go to something that Tom Tillis said. That's just stupid on stilts. Now, Chuck Grassley's common sense, we ought to vote this thing down. They tried to bring that to a floor vote. It was Massey and Kahana to get this section taken out. They were denied by the Rules Committee in the House. But Sarah and Pete, you'd know about these things. Let me hear your comments on this, especially this business about cooperation without oversight. You'll find more about that in the Quincy Institute. Let me hear what you have to say about that, please. Thank you.
All right, Floyd, fired up about that. Sarah, do you have any knowledge, expertise here we can lend to Floyd?
I don't know that I don't know exactly what clause he's talking about.
Okay,
there.
We don't want to speak out of without the expertise. And Dave, unless you want to jump in here, we'll move on to our next thing. Sorry, Floyd, we can't get you an answer on that. Can't be up to date on everything that's taking place under the sun in our political landscape. I wanted to end here by having us look at today in Iowa. We have more than 100 new Iowa laws taking effect today. We're hearing about them in our IPR news. Some of the key ones on abortion medication, the governor's emergency powers curtailed. We have E-Verify, immigration checks, community IDs banned. So many things here. Dave, let me start with you. Looking at the list here, which of these new Iowa laws do you think do you have your eyes on will have a lasting political or policy impact?
I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question. None of them seem as dramatic as we've seen in the past few cycles or past few terms, right? The Republicans have had a trifecta for so long that they've done everything major that they want to do. And so what we have is a lot of smaller pieces this cycle. And my guess, the one that sort of probably is the most consequential is the one about gubernatorial power. And in part, to me, it's a signal of the threat that the Republicans in the legislature and Kim Reynolds feel about the next cycle. This was not done when it was pretty clear that there was going to be a Republican governor for a while. But as we're coming into a cycle where there's a lot more uncertainty about who will be governor, right? Reynolds isn't running. The race is probably going to be pretty close. That's when the Republicans in the legislature and Governor Reynolds decided to curtail the powers of the governor when they were less certain that the governor would be a Republican.
Yeah. It's unusual when you look at it that a governor curtailing, I guess, her own powers in the last few months of her administration.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen other states do this as well. When it looks like the party in control is going to change, or there's a good chance that it will, then there are efforts to weaken the governor in response.
Yeah. Sarah, what do you have your eyes on in terms of the Iowa laws taking effect today, July 1st?
Well, I think the abortion medication bill is significant as an extension of the 6-week abortion ban limit that went into effect in 2024. Here in Iowa City, we're already seeing the effects of that because Planned Parenthood is shutting down their office here. So they're firing 11 people and laying off 38 others. So that's people losing their jobs, but also a lot of people that were clients of Planned Parenthood not having access to care. And Iowa already has the lowest rate of OBGYN doctors in the country. So these kinds of restrictions make it more difficult for hospitals to recruit doctors, especially in rural areas. And I think, the legislature has taken some action to try to address this, both in terms of creating higher reimbursements for doctors taking on pregnant patients, but also trying to create incentives for more medical students to study here. But I think, we're still studying the effects of these state level bills on, things like how many doctors are in the state. So, but I think, this is one long-term impact that I think that I'll be watching for Iowa. I guess the good news for Iowans is that we are contiguous to other states that have access to abortion medication and abortion procedures. So unlike people who live in some areas of the South, you have the ability to cross a border and get care.
Yeah. Okay, we have a couple minutes left, wide open here, throwing it wide open to ask each of you what you have about a minute for each of you, what you have your eyes on going forward. Dave, may I start with you?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of hinted this a little bit, I think. Actually, the one thing I'll add is the Iowa caucuses, right? That
right, we didn't get to that in depth, right?
Yep, and the fight over whether or not the Democratic caucuses are going to get to go first is ramping up, and the Iowa Democratic Party's in this bind of what the DNC is probably going to do by saying we don't get to go early versus what state law is saying we have to go early, and how that they're going to strike that balance.
Yeah. To be addressed in a future show. Sarah, what do you have looking forward to that didn't get checked off today that because of our lack of time?
Well, I'm a war scholar, so I'm always paying attention to
there's nothing to talk
things
about
like
there, right?
the Iran war. But no, I mean, I've seen people in Trump's administration are presenting him with plans for upping a ground attack against Iran. Versus signing an agreement that this ends. So I think we're still in a waiting period of, we don't know exactly how this is going to end up. And so I'm definitely following the negotiations.
Yeah. Do you have a best guess? If you had to guess now, how does it end? The war in Iran?
You've got both Oman and Iran already saying that they're going to start charging fees in the Strait of Hormuz. So the U.S. has already lost in some ways. This was a free passage strait, and now you've got the two countries that control it saying they're gonna change that moving forward. So and also you've got so many. The question of what is Israel going to do both in Lebanon and Iran? Israel also allegedly planning ramped up attacks against Iran and refusing to withdraw from Lebanon. So I don't think this is going to end easily, even though the president is portraying it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Sara Mitchell, we thank you and Dave Peterson for your expertise in different areas, overlapping here on our political landscape in some areas. Sara Mitchell, Professor of Political Science, Collegiate Fellow at the University of Iowa. Dave Peterson, Lucan Professor of Political Science at Iowa State University. Thank you for your time and your expertise, and thanks to our listeners for all the wonderful input.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Today's program produced by Danny Gear. Catherine Perkins is our executive producer, and we'll tackle these SCOTUS decisions from a legal perspective next week, so stay tuned for that. I'm Ben Kiefer. Thanks for joining us.